My name is Mike, I'm an alcoholic. And by the grace of God, so far today I haven't taken a drink. And without this program, that would not be possible. Especially, you know, I went to rehab eventually, and then I had to go back to Mozambique. And there's no AA in Mozambique. So, for me, it became a daily thing, because in Mozambique there's bugger all to do, except drink. You know, there's no infrastructure like we have here, so it's not true that there isn't anything else to drink, but that's what people do there. You can go fishing and various other things, but it's not like what we have here. So there were no meetings, and for me it became very much a daily thing. And so for me, every night that I put my head on the pillow, now, no matter how shit the day's been, if I'm still sober, then in my case, certainly that's a miracle. And I'm very happy with that. And again, without this program, it's not possible. So I grew up in Rhodesia, lived in a little place called Gwello. And unfortunately, my dad was a very heavy drinker, and my mother never drank at all. So from a very early age, there was tension in our house about his drinking and finances and various other things. And at about the age of 9 or 10, my parents separated. So I ended up leaving Rhodesia, and my mother went to East London and to complete her midwifery course. She was a nurse, and she took my sister and me to East London with her, and I was put into a Catholic school, and my sister was put in a convent. So that was quite a big change for me, but it was actually a relief to be out of that situation that was going down at home. And anyway, after a year and my mother had completed her course, her and my father decided to have another go at it. And the decision was to leave me in East London, and everybody else went back to Rhodesia. So I was actually quite happy with that decision. I liked East London, I'd made good friends, and I didn't want to go back to that family atmosphere. So boarding school suited me. And so I only went home twice a year, because in those days we didn't do much flying, or it was expensive, and the train trip back for me was 2.5 days. So I would only go home in the July holidays and briefly at Christmas, because then my parents would go on their annual holiday. So I was never very much in one place except at school. Eventually in about 1970, I think, my father had to make a decision, because my sister was going to high school and the government wouldn't give him money to send her out the country for schooling. So I had a choice, and I decided to finish my schooling in Rhodesia. I think I went back to school in Rhodesia at about 14, and that's when I can remember having my first drink. And it was the night of the school gala, and myself and a few other guys, we were 14, 15, I can't remember the exact year. We had organized some booze. We each had a quarter jack of cane and 2 Cokes each. And we went to a place in the bush, just outside of our hostel, after the gala, knowing that we wouldn't be missed. And I proceeded to get, well, I was finished before everybody else, put it that way. And then the other 4 or 5 guys that were with me, like normal drinkers, most of them after 2 had said, no, well, that's enough, we'll keep this for another time. I told them drink, and I drank everybody's and finished it. So that first memory, you know, I got absolutely legless the first time I drank, and that's what I thought the actual result would be, because that's how I'd seen my father. I didn't understand. If you got drunk, if you drank, then you needed that result, that you were bumbling around and talking shit. So in my attitude to drinking was, if you didn't get pissed, then actually a waste of time. And I always drank. From that day, I don't ever remember drinking normally, ever. You know, when I started drinking, I had to get legless. Otherwise, I didn't think I'd achieved the result. And in the early days, you know, in Rhodesia, so Rhodesia was drinking country. You know, I grew up on a sugar estate, very much like these estates here in Natal, where the country club was the centre of activity. There wasn't anything else around for miles. And I'd sit outside with 20 other kids on the roundabout and watch our parents, never my mother, but my father, all the appies, all the guys that worked in the mill on a Friday night. You'd get your packet of chips and a Coke while you sat outside, and then everybody came out talked. And so that, you know, that was the sort of, I checked the appies getting docked all weekend, and not much older than me, and I thought, hey, this is the way to go. Anyway, I left school and I joined the British South Africa Police. And there was a civil war going on at that stage in Zimbabwe. So I was fully involved in that war from 1974 until 1980. And there was a lot of drinking there. And drinking was condoned. You know, people got out of hand, and it was just, you know, he's just come off a long bush trip or something like that. Nobody pointed fingers in those days, or said that, you know, you behaving socially unacceptably. It was just accepted that there was a war on and everybody was under pressure, and that's what you did. So, you know, nobody ever took me to task in those days about my drinking. And I was a heavy drinker, but I didn't drink on a daily basis at that stage. And in 1980, at independence, I decided to leave Rhodesia and go to which was going to become Zimbabwe. And I went to Cape Town, and I think that was the start of my geographicals. I knew that I was a problem drinker. I didn't consider myself to be an alcoholic. And so I went to Cape Town and I did a dive course in Cape Town, and on that dive course we were hired straight. I mean, the day we finished, we went to Richards Bay, and I dived on the second phase of Richards Bay Harbour for about 9 months. And then I left and I went overseas, and I was on the rigs in the North Sea for 3 years, and then I did another 3 years in the Gulf diving on the rigs. So in that period, when I became a diver, and also in the military side, the drinking was always quite controlled because of the discipline you had to have, because of the nature of the job. And again, in the diving industry, you weren't allowed to drink offshore. And but in those days, they didn't breathalyze you, because if they did that, I would never have got offshore. Now you breathalyze. So, I mean, we used to drink until the moment we jumped on that chopper to go to the oil rig. And got got in the water half pissed. You know, that's the way it was for me, not all the guys. So anyway, I was very lucky. You know, I made quite a lot of money out of that diving industry, and I met my ex-wife overseas in a ski resort, and we got married. And I had I bought a franchise in London, and I worked at that franchise for nearly 3 years, and then I sold it, and then I got on a bodyguard team in France. Well, actually Saudi Arabia, but based Saudi Arabia and France. And I never joined as a bodyguard because I didn't have the right qualification, but I was actually working for this team in an intelligence capacity. But I ended up as a bodyguard because they didn't want to spend any more money on bodyguards, so when they left, one guy left, they just said, right, you're a bodyguard now. That's how it was. And again, I made a lot of money, and I went back to Rhodesia in 1993. Zimbabwe, sorry. So all that time, even with that business in London, I did work 7 days a week, and I worked hard because I couldn't really find any English guys that wanted to work hard enough. I mostly employed South Africans and Kiwis and Aussies, but I had to do a lot of work on my own because, you know, it was successful, but so, you know, my drinking, when I drank, I got pissed. That was all there was to it. But, you know, all those years, there was a lot of discipline involved, and I kept to those disciplines. So, you know, I never got fired from anywhere from drinking. Or once I had my own business, and I basically, from the time I started diving, I was self-employed. I never worked for anyone again. And I was probably unemployable because, you know, my attitude and self-will was that I didn't really like taking orders from anybody. And so I got back to Rhodesia in 1993, and in 1994 I came home one evening, and my wife had disappeared with my kids. It was actually quite a shock to me. I didn't quite understand what was going on, but she had had enough, and now when I look back, I don't blame her at all for what she did, and I'm very sorry for what I put her through. I did manage to maintain a very close bond with my kids, so, you know, although I carried on drinking, that is when I went to AA. But when I went to AA, it was to please my mother and father, not anybody else. I thought, okay, let me go and try this AA out, because, yeah, you talk too much and maybe you'll learn how to talk properly, like everyone else. So that's what I thought might happen to me. But then, you know, like last Sunday's reading, every time I went into the rooms, then I always looked for somebody that was worse than me, that drank like I didn't drink. And I used to look and say, oh, no, well, I'm not like that, that's for sure. So, and I spent the next 17 years walking in and out of the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous and doing Mike's Anonymous, which was never very successful. And every time I picked up a drink again, it was worse. The end result was worse. So, you know, I had to learn the hard way. My denial was, you know, I couldn't actually say in the early days, and even now, my name's Mike and I'm an alcoholic. Yeah, I couldn't say that. I'd start stuttering. I'd say, you know, people could call me anything, but if you called me an alcoholic, I wanted to fight. So, you know, that was how bad. Call me anything you like, but just don't call me an alcoholic, because I'm functional, I know what I'm doing, I've got all the answers, I haven't lost anything yet, and, you know, you think what you like, but I know what I am. And anyway, you know, I carried on drinking, and I'd have periods of sobriety, and then I'd go off the rails again and hit a low, because I never hit a rock bottom until my final bender. And so the drinking was a daily thing, not first thing in the morning, until my last sort of year of drinking. But I drank every day, and I drank hard. So in 2002, in Zimbabwe in 2000, I got involved in the politics of Zimbabwe. I'd actually gone back there as an outside investor and invested quite a lot of money there, and I'd recently purchased some land. So when Mugabe had started taking the land in 2000, then I started making a noise. And in 2002, I was deported. I had 72 hours to leave the country. And I ended up in Mozambique, and then from Mozambique, I went to London, and I spent 18 months in London, came back to South Africa, and then ended up in Mozambique again. So, you know, I was in AA in London, AA in South Africa, but, you know, every time I walked out, and every time I picked up again, I planned that occasion. I knew what I was doing. I thought that, no, you know, you did that wrong last time, but, you know, this time. And of course, we all know that it's just insanity. And I couldn't get that insanity through my head. And eventually, I got involved with a woman in Mozambique, and God bless her, because I don't know what she ever saw in me at that stage. Anyway, she moved in with her 2 kids, and eventually I gave her marching orders, and I came back on a Saturday from work, and she had emptied my house. So, but on the way home, one of my customers had given me a case of Heineken. So, you know, I'm also diabetic, so she had taken everything out the house, but she left a Coleman with the beers that were left in the fridge and my insulin. So there was nothing left except, so I put the rest of the Heineken that I'd just been given into that cooler box, sent the gardener for ice, and that was the start of my last pistol. I don't remember much about that weekend. I do know that the previous tenant in the house that I lived in Beira, he had 3 kids, and he had a snooker ball as the pressure on the joint taps. And on the Monday morning, I woke up and I had a shiner in the one eye. So I can only believe that in blackout I'd gone down to switch off that snooker ball on and off, and you know, it was absolutely perfect. Anyway, I called a mate of mine and I told him, no, I'm done. I need to go to find me a rehab, please. Which he did, and so on that Wednesday I went into a rehab in Joburg, and that was my rock bottom. After that 3-4 day piss-up that I had, I really didn't know which way to turn anymore. And I just thought, you've tried everything else, especially your way, and that doesn't work. And I went to a rehab in Joburg, and I can honestly say that from the time that I walked into that rehab, within they knocked me out for 2 days, which surprised me because I was actually sober when I walked in, and then I went on this trip for 2 days, which sort of alarmed me a bit, and I woke up with a limp, which I didn't have when I got there. So, that was quite frightening too, but it did recover, thank God. And but just after being in that rehab, for a couple of days after my detox or whatever, I did feel at peace. I felt that I felt safe, and I just saw in the people there that they had some serenity, something that I had never actually known. I didn't know it was called serenity. It never entered my head, serenity. I also thought I was bulletproof. That fear, fear is when the bullets are flying at you and you're managing to duck them. So, fear, defects, they never entered my head. I didn't think I had any defects of any description. So it only dawned on me that I did have something, and that was called luck, because by the time I'd been in rehab for a week, the first thing I did was surrender, and I think that's the important part. I had to accept that I had fucked up all along the way, and by the grace of God and His blessing, somehow I got through that, because, even in the diving, on 2 or 3 occasions, I could have dived deep, and somebody must have intervened, because I wasn't clever enough to get out of that situation I got myself into. So, and many other things. I just thought, it's actually time for you to accept what you are and accept this program. And thankfully I did. And, I was the oldest guy in that rehab by quite a long way. And I had to go and see the doctor after about a couple of days. They check you out, and I walked in there. There was this doctor. He looked at me, checked me out, said, "What are you doing here?" So I said, "No, I've got a drink problem." And he said, "Oh." And then he said to me, "Why don't you just fucking grow up? Do you want to be around all these lighties here? What are you doing here?" I said, "Gee, this looks a bit bloody straight." But anyway, he's the doctor, so better shut up. And then we went to meetings all week from the rehab, and then the Thursday night, the greeter at the door was that doctor. So, I got quite a good wake up there. And rehab was very good for me. It was also hard for me, because within 5 or 6 days of me being sober, I started getting terrible pain in my neck, down my arm, and it's actually difficult for me to write. And when you're trying to do my life story and all that, after about 10 days, one of the therapists came round and said to me, "Well, you haven't got much to say, have you?" I said, "I can't write." And I'd obviously had an injury very early on in life, and I'd anesthetized myself every day. Only when I got sober, I had this problem, which actually was in the end, 2 years later, I had a neck fusion. But I had this, definitely I anesthetized myself on a daily basis. But it was no excuse for the way that I drank, because, if I'd stayed sober long enough, I would have known that there was a problem in my neck, but I didn't. So, I did have long periods of sobriety, and but I was restless, irritable, and a jerk. I mean, my mates used to say to me, if you're not drinking, don't come to the bar, you sour the beer. So, you know, that's what I was like when I wasn't like they. If you go to that big book meeting in Joburg, Frank will tell you that when you drink, you've got a problem, and when you don't drink, you might even have a bigger problem. So, and I was definitely like that. You know, I didn't know what to do with myself when I wasn't drinking. I was terrible. So I fully embraced that program, and when I came out of rehab, I went to a meeting in Randburg, and I met a guy that was a bit older than me, and he became my sponsor. And that was important. I needed a sponsor because I was going back to Mars, and you know, I had to do it alone. So at that stage, I joined a thing called Loners International. That was an AA online group. So it wasn't a chat group. It was just online, and we responded to each other and to the group, but not live online. So, you know, Winston got me on the steps straight away, and then I used to go to Joburg because of my business quite often. So every time I was in Joburg, we'd do a couple of steps, and I'd prepare, and then and those steps also changed my life because I got a perspective on the damage that I'd done. Well, I had to look at the damage I'd done. It wasn't a perspective. I had to be truthful, and I realized what I'd done, and so I went through my steps with Winston, and I've managed to stay sober ever since. And last year I was able, I've been going to the States to a conference for quite a few years now. Last year I was able to go to Akron, went to Dr. Bob's house, to his grave, to the museum in Akron, and the oldest meeting in the world in AA. And that's where my journey's taken me. AA is a very important part of my life, and every promise, everything that was told to me has happened. I can't adequately describe how my life has changed in the years that I've been sober as opposed to the years that I was drunk. And you know, my gratitude is enormous to AA. If I can just help someone sometime by being sober, then for me that's good. I try to be generous because people have been generous. God's been generous to me, and I just hope that I'll stay in the program like I have for as long as I have. And I say to people, you know, because of my denial, when they tell you keep coming back, because, you know, eventually it works, even for hard-ass bastards like me. That first meeting that I ever went to, I was taken by a very good family friend to my first meeting. And something definitely stuck at that first meeting, although I looked at the differences. You know, I definitely knew that there was a way out of this, but I couldn't get it through my thick skin. That I had to make changes and certain sacrifices, And to me, my self-will then just didn't allow that sort of thinking. So I'm very, very grateful that eventually in that rehab I saw the light and eventually surrendered and accepted I am what I am and it is what it is on a daily basis, and if I follow this program on a daily basis, I'm not going to get into too much trouble, and far less trouble than I ever did when I was drinking. And I will be able to handle what's thrown at you, which is normal for everybody in everyday life. I now have those tools to look at things in a totally different light, and most certainly not in what is the best outcome for mine. So thank you for being here for me today, and thank you for my sobriety.